A good question that I keep meaning to talk about, at least briefly, because I don't want to like domineer the show with this kind of talk, is how to support those content creators that you like. And you know, in the context of me talking about it, it's I'm talking about YouTube channels, so we're going to focus on that. But probably there's everybody listening. There's YouTube channels that you like, and blogs that you read, and forums that you visit, and all that kind of stuff. How do you help support those content creators that whose work you like? And in some cases, we make it easy in that, hey, there's a Patreon. There's a link to the Patreon in the video description right now. In fact, if you'd like to directly support Ardwulf's Lair, that would be great, which you can do as cheaply as for a couple dollars. But let's say that's just not an option for you for whatever reason, or you don't want to deal with Patreon, which is a reservation that I have some sympathy with. The best way to support a YouTube creator is to watch the videos, like the videos, subscribe to the channel, and click the notifications icon. The dreaded YouTube algorithm really puts a lot on clicking that notifications algorithm. Now, I don't have notifications pushed to my phone or anything like that. It only comes up for me when I go to YouTube, and then I have a little icon in the upper right-hand corner. And I have, those channels that I've chosen to turn notifications on for. I get a little notification that they've uploaded something, or they went live, or whatever it is. And comment on the videos. A lively discussion in the comments on videos is also super duper helpful. So yeah, a lot of us are patrons of Dan. So let me talk about that. So I'll circle back to this toward the end of the show as well, but I want to mention that on No Enemies Here, the Wargaming news channel run by Mr. Dan Panicotta, I was on last Wednesday with him talking about introductory topics related to wargaming, and we talked about the definition, the very tiresome definition of what is a wargame. This week, we will be here on this channel on Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So those who have trouble because they're in the UK or wherever catching up with this show, you might find that time slot is slightly less unfriendly to you. And we're only going to go for about an hour. This is the target. Of course, I'm running the thing this time, so Dan will stay on as long as I damn well need him there. But we'll see. We might have another guest as well. We'll see if that materializes. So tune in at 6:30 p.m. Here at this channel, and there's a card for the show already. And Dan will be with there as well. So. Today we are clipping Napoleon against Russia. So in the process of kind of organizing, I'm going to talk about this too before we get to the topic of the week, which is more of a question more tailored toward stirring discussion than in search of a definitive answer anyway. Discussion and thought. We're doing Napoleon against Russia. This is another Kevin Zucker OSG design from the Library of Napoleonic Battles I've mentioned before. This is a series I like a lot. This week's unboxing video is ASL stuff. That'll be on Thursday. Next week will be Highway to the Kremlin 2, also new release from OSG. This is a 2015 release, and this covers 5 big battles. I think they're all fairly big battles. Certainly Smolensk and Borodino were quite large battles. Of the 1812 campaign in Russia. This, of course, is a very messy campaign for Napoleon. He entered it with the largest army that I think Europe had ever seen at the time, and left with an army way smaller than that. And most of his losses were not due to battle results necessarily, but to the extremely attritive nature of the retreat from Moscow, which he occupied for quite some time. So there's some really big and interesting battles in here. Smolensk and Borodino. Shevardino, of course, is like a prelude to Borodino. Valutino, I don't know a lot about, and Maloyaroslavets, which I had to look up how to, or at least struggle with and practice pronouncing. So I did the video unboxing of Napoleon Invades Spain last week, and it drew some chatter in the comments about the card deck situation in the Library of Napoleonic Battles series. Now, a couple things on the cards, okay? So here's the cards. 2 decks of cards, right? There's a French deck and a coalition deck. And it is the cards are optional. You don't have to play with them, but they do kind of make it a card-driven game in the sense that it is the cards that are the pacing mechanism for the game. And the cards have, special ability type things on them as well. But 54 people already. Wow. Okay. So, the numbers on this thing just keep getting bigger, and I'm not quite sure what to do. I need somebody. If anyone would like to volunteer to help be a moderator on these things, by the way, please send me an email at Ardwulf's Lair, all one word, @gmail.com. That would be appreciated. All right, so we're doing the way we are organizing this, and once again, I already have the tray labeled. Because of the deck of cards, the entire thing has to fit in one tray. And despite the fact that I think this is the biggest or possibly second biggest game in the series in terms of number of unit counters, I'm not terribly dissatisfied with getting this into one tray, actually. So let's say some more hellos. Hold on a second. We got to scroll up. Jeffrey Wesovich, David Miskell, Kenneth Kloby, Jim Orzowski. I don't know if that's the good pronunciation of your last name. That's how Brant says it, so that's what I'm going with until you correct me. Matt Chestnut, Lind Pratt, local Central Ohio. Hellos to you. Kevin Paulson, John Longshore, of course, is always here. Phil Hatfield, Phil, thanks for stopping by. Greg Grant, Robert Reese Jr., Heth Will, and that might be it. And Purple Norseman just stuck his head in. So that's a thing, that the French won most of these battles, right? Although, definitely in the case of Borodino, Napoleon's reluctance, or indeed refusal, to commit the Imperial Guard at a decisive moment probably cost him many, many thousands of additional casualties over the course of the battle. Which definitely didn't help, and allowed the Russians to keep on, or at least was a factor in allowing the Russians to keep on fighting. So, okay, so, Buffalo Trace. Yeah, I like Buffalo Trace. So, here's the secret to Buffalo Trace, though. Here in Ohio, we have weird prohibition-era liquor laws where you got to buy your liquor from the state. I'll rant about that at some point again. Buffalo Trace is a big distillery that makes a bunch of different stuff for all kinds of people, some of which gets labeled as Buffalo Trace and some of which doesn't. Here in Ohio, Buffalo Trace costs something like $30 a bottle. And I don't know that it has an age statement on it, but it's aged for a few years, above the minimum. There is, on the other hand, another label, Benchmark number 8, which costs $9. And which is, to my palate, distinguishable from Buffalo Trace, but it's not like Buffalo Trace isn't like 3 times better, and it's 3 times the price. So I keep a bottle of Benchmark on hand for doing things like drinking on the rocks, and I occasionally cook with bourbon, that kind of thing. So we're looking for nay. There's nay. All right, so scale for games. So let's get back to the cards here before I touch on the topic of the week. It was raised, and this is, I think, a pretty legitimate criticism, that the games no longer include the deck of cards. You have to buy the separate deck of cards. And if you do go buy the deck of cards separately, it's actually 2 decks. You got to buy the French deck separate from the Coalition deck, and each deck is $14. And these decks are probably about 50 or 60 cards a piece. That's another $28 plus shipping that you got to pay. The communication on this certainly has not been good, and having left the cards out of the latest game, they certainly didn't lower the price. It's not cheaper, because, nor is it a smaller game particularly. You still got 2 counter sheets. You still got 4 maps. I consider the thing to be, good value for the money. But I, plan to get play value out of all these things. And the Peninsular War in particular is a fairly interesting corner of the Napoleonic Wars in general. It turns out that if you have a copy of Napoleon's Wheel, That includes the new Universal Card Deck, which will apply to all the games in the Library of Napoleonic Battles series. I have Napoleon's Wheel, which is the Austerlitz campaign, so I do not need to run down an additional universal deck of cards. And you know, I suspect that most people that buy these buy them all, right, as they come out. And that's where I'm at with this series. So now there is the map edge problem, which we will talk about. The map, that's not a problem in Napoleon again invades Spain. We will talk about the map edge issue in the unboxing for Highway to the Kremlin 2. That is it. That feels like a lazy mistake. That I will legitimately agree with. So some folks are, you know, a bit miffed by having to now buy the extra cards if they presumably don't have a copy of Napoleon's Wheel and didn't get a discount, particularly on Napoleon Invades Spain. And that's true. I mean, I am sympathetic to that view, but at the same time, you know, if cutting this particular corner makes things work out better for OSG, I'm pretty much okay with that. We are talking, after all, about a literal one-man operation. It's not like they're this big company or big publisher. I would like to support the publisher. So, let's look at the chat. I'm not supposed to watch YouTube when logged into my work account anymore. You know, that's generally, I mean, I don't know. My former employer would not have cared if it wasn't for the fact that at various times, people watching YouTube on the clock, which you can still get work done and watch YouTube at the same time. I mean, I've turn stuff on and tune out all the time. In fact, that's how I got a lot of counters clipped. But the bandwidth can be substantial. If you have 15 people watching YouTube, suddenly it's a lot of bandwidth, even for a big infrastructure. John Longshore, I believe you are talking about the folks at Critical Hit. Yes, they did indeed do ASL the American Civil War. It is ludicrous. Exactly as ludicrous as it sounds. And Toil has managed to introduce the lowest practical scale for Wargames, which is the plank scale, which is awesome. So, that aside, let's get back to organized here. So, the way these are organized, I'm a little confused because there's like IVC, which is French, French. They're French units, but, that's 4th Cavalry is the way I interpret it, but it looks like the color is the same, but that's not always the case, as the 4th Corps. And it's not clear to me in terms of, I'm not familiar enough with the orders of battle for these things to say if that is somehow meaningful. I mean, maybe it is and maybe it isn't. Very difficult to say. Anyway. Yeah, I gotta take it apart and clean it again. Sorry about the squeak. I do, like I said, I'm sympathetic to the question about the cards, because it is extra money you're asking people for now. After all, it feels like extra money. I mean, it's something that was included in the games and now isn't included in the games anymore. Yeah, see, the 1st Corps and 1C are not the same color. So that smells like coincidence to me. So the Leipzig game might be bigger in terms of number of counters. Might be bigger than this one, but not by much if it is. The battle was bigger than any of these individual battles. The Leipzig game also, I mean, pretty much the order of battle in the Leipzig game which is Napoleon at Leipzig, which has been released in several different editions at this point, originally by Clash of Arms. But the most recent edition was the OSG version. the order of battle in that game is pretty much the order of battle for Leipzig rather than for, the whatever whatever the other battles that are the much smaller battles that occurred in the campaign. We're already up to 71. I don't like to use WD-40 on these. WD-40 is not a lubricant; it is a solvent. And while I could probably eliminate the squeak with it, the squeak would come back immediately. What I probably want is some kind of graphite solvent or machine oil or something like that. WD-40 is great for cleaning things, and it evaporates very quickly. That's why you don't necessarily want to use it to lubricate, because it will evaporate too quickly. So, all right, first cav. Non-Sutees first cav. So, anyway, it's not like I've clipped a bunch of stuff between now and last week. And these are super squeaky. Let me try another thing that helps sometimes, which is compressed air, just to blow it out. If this is too loud, which it might be. I mean, you could use a heavy petroleum lubricant like Vaseline, but my other concern with that is it'll get everywhere. Twilight 2000 chat. At some point we might circle back to that topic, actually, because there is a new edition of Twilight 2000 on its way from Free League Publishing, which is the same folks who are doing the new edition of the One Ring RPG and all that. So optimal scale for Wargames. Now, I'm going to tell you that my optimal... This is actually what spawned the question, which I came up with 2 hours ago. My optimal scale is... I think this one, actually, at least for this topic, right? So that optimal scale will potentially at least vary by topic. It might be different for World War II than it is for ancient Roman stuff. And I guess what the idea of the question was to make people think about what is it about a specific scale, whether it's a tactical scale. Then you have high level tactical, low level tactical. So I mean, when we say tactical, okay, so we have World War II games, and we have tactical World War II games, and we have squad level World War II games, and we have platoon level World War II games, and we have company level World War II games, some of which would be considered tactical. And then we have individual man-to-man games. As I recall, it's a game I've never played, so feel free to correct me if this is wrong. Ambush was a man-to-man, was it not? So you have a fairly wide range of potentially, the same topic, right? World War II tactical, but you have a potentially wide range of different levels of that treatment. So the question then is, what is it about the scale chosen for a particular game that speaks to you? What features does that scale allow the game to highlight? And to me, that one of the interesting things about Wargames is how it shows and illustrates command and control relationships. And that's something that this series does relatively simply. I mean, you have a command range, and units may be in command, in which case they can do stuff, and they may be out of command, in which case they have to roll to see if they can do stuff or not. In an otherwise relatively straightforward I go, you go system. If one of the things that you want to see reflected is the socio-political context of a conflict, then tactical is probably not going to be a scale that appeals to you very much, unless you then stretch, I think, a little bit the definition of tactical to include something like Churchill or Versailles 1919. Apparently there are quite a few people who feel that the company scale is perfect for Operation Market Garden, considering that there have been 3, and there will be 4, basically company scale games. Will be 5, thinking about it, on Market Garden. There's the original Highway to the Right company scale. There's It Never Snows, SCS game. There's the Grand Tactical Series, huge 2-game thing. We're going to get a Goss version, which will be called Over the Rhine, I want to say. That's going to be the next series game in the Goss series, which will be Market Garden, which is a battalion-level game, but in practice, there are a lot of company-level elements on the map in a Goss game. Because essentially everything can be broken down, and it is sometimes very advantageous to do that breakdown. And then we're going to get another GTS Market Garden sooner or later, hopefully, in the form of a Magnificent Disaster, which will be the new version of the Devil's Cauldron and Regal's Dare. Hopefully. That is still in the pipeline. Alright, trying to keep this straight because some of these are kind of mixed up. Over the Rhine, yes. I wanted to say Beyond the Rhine because, of course, there is a game called Beyond the Rhine, which, of course, I also have, which is the OCS game, which includes Market Garden, but includes a great deal else besides Market Garden. In fact, Market Garden is something that occurs if it occurs in Beyond the Rhine, which is, debatable whether it will, for reasons that I'll talk about at some point in detail. It occurs over the span of 3 turns relatively early on in a very long game. I feel like I need some light. We're not talking about those people today, just so you know. So, Stegler, I kind of suspected that would happen as well, and it won't, according to Joe Youst, who is the series designer. It will be called Over the Rhine. They do already have a version of Highway to the Reich, which is basically a straight reprint of the SPI Classic. To what extent it inherits the problems of the SPI Classic, I don't know, because I haven't looked at it, and I'm not going to buy it to find out. So, another thing that I will mention is that sometime soon, and I wanted to get this done in this week, and it looks now like it is going to happen next week, is that the sale video, the next Wargaming sale, which I need to get moving because there's more stuff en route, incoming. Hopefully we will get that video done this week so that I can launch the thing next week. Medium weight Napoleonics. So Loquitur Gaming would like a recommendation for medium weight Napoleonics, heavier than Napoleonic 20, but not as big as La Bataille. So by your framing of that question, you are implying that you want something at the battle scale. There's 2 things I would recommend. One is the Eagles of France series from Hexasim. Those can be hard to rustle up. Or this series, the Library of Napoleonic Battles, which I think is simpler. This is essentially the same system as the classic Napoleon's Last Battles from SPI, with an extra layer of chrome or so. It's my choice. I chose it over the Hexasim Eagles of France series, in part because of superior coverage. There's a lot more battles that I can get to in this series than there are in the Eagles of France series. The scale's different, right? So that, like, their Austerlitz battle is probably 3 times as many counters as this Austerlitz battle in this system would be. But they are very attractive, they're very well regarded, and I have nothing bad to say about them whatsoever, except that there are only 4 battles available in the series. There's 5 battles in this box. So I'm able to do things like, okay, today we're doing Borodino, or, this month we're doing Borodino, and next week we'll do Austerlitz, and next week we'll do some other battle like Salamanca that's not available in the Eagles of France series, and which that series is likely to never get to. Labatt is super complicated. It has a large number of different sets of parallel rules, which is fairly irritating in my opinion, in that the Labatt folks, the people that play Labatt, tend to flip back and forth between Labatt systems that they're playing that particular game in. So they know them all, but they always get them mixed up. So you end up with this weird synthesis at any given Labatt table. And that's fine for those guys, but then, stepping into that is a mess. So Jim says that XSM Waterloo Quatre Bras is almost as pretty as miniatures. That's true, and you don't have to paint the miniatures. I'm always gonna, for me, and maybe this is something we'll talk about too in detail at some point, miniatures is just not something that I want to deal with. So, those folks having fun with miniatures can feel free to continue to do so with my blessing. And I say that not facetiously at all. I hope they have fun. I choose not to deal with miniatures because of the amount of bandwidth, in terms of both time and money, that miniatures, just dealing with the miniatures, consumes. It's like buying the miniatures, prepping the miniatures, painting the miniatures, making the terrain is like its own hobby, and I've got enough expensive hobbies. Michael Oberly mentions the old L'Armée du Nord, which I actually got rid of in the last sale as a hand-me-down from the person whose collection I was selling. It is also a fairly attractive... The counters are fairly attractive. The map is a Rick Barber map, so some people like Rick Barber maps. I like Rick as an artist, but his maps are often very difficult to read. I didn't notice that about that particular map. Favorite game at each scale? That's a good question. Favorite tactical game. So, I'm going to a little bit cheat the question and name series rather than individual games in many cases. Tactical, I think most people are going to expect me to say ASL, but that's actually not the case. Favorite tactical is Great Battles of History for me. Again, in part because of the breadth of its coverage. You can, if you're, you have a Great Battles of History table, and generally speaking, you can get a battle, except for the very biggest ones, you can get a battle done in a sitting, even if it's not necessarily 2 hours, but between 4 and 6 hours. You can absolutely finish, any but the biggest GBOH battle in one sitting. And you have an enormous breadth of coverage. You can go from Gaugamela to something Byzantine, to something Roman, to something featuring, battles of ancient India, right? So you have a tremendous breadth of coverage in a system that's designed to show how different weapon and tactical systems interact. So strategic. I will preface this by saying I tend not to think in terms of this is my favorite, because frankly my favorite changes. You ask me now and I might tell you something, and then you ask me a year from now and I'm going to tell you something completely different. What I tend to think of is here is the circle of games that are my favorites. So that said, GBOH for tactical. For strategic, I'm going to say World in Flames. For operational is where it becomes difficult, because a lot of the gaming that I do now is operational gaming. Certainly we play a lot of OCS, the Operational Combat Series, and it is a favorite. And I, make no apologies for that. But, and again, if you ask me at a different time, I might say something different. We're going to probably circle back to Great Campaigns of the American Civil War, which I think is a brilliant system that brilliantly highlights the challenges of, and actually the question, it highlights the question too, of the operational scale in Civil War, right? So, and Toil, there are a few man-to-man games. So City Fight, I want to say SPI City Fight, which was not World War II, but I think it was modern, intended to be modern. I think that was man-to-man, as I recall, and I believe I mentioned Ambush already. On the other hand, it blurs the line between wargame and role-playing game when we start talking about man-to-man, right? So an individual one-to-one scale. Nothing wrong with that, but it is traditionally not a favored scale, I will tell you that. Phil Hetfield mentions Empires in Arms as strategic. That's certainly, I think, and I just obtained my first copy of Empires in Arms, which I still have not played, last year sometime, and it definitely looks interesting. I have looked at it in the past. There was, and we did a video on this, in fact, there was a group that used to play Empires in Arms at a game store up in the Cleveland area years and years ago. That the game store doesn't exist anymore, but they didn't do war games. I mean, they were more of a magic card store than anything else. And yet, there they were, super hardcore into it, playing Empires in Arms once a week. I found that fascinating even at the time, and we talked about that in the video. I wonder what the scale is in... I used to have it. I never played it, though, so I don't remember. What was the scale of the Avalon Hill Starship Troopers? Was that an individual mobile infantry soldier on that one counter? Because it might have been. It would have been thematically appropriate to the novel if it had been the case. The Fantasy Trip or Melee, Wargame or RPG. That's an RPG. But it's definitely, an old school RPG in the sense of showcasing its wargame elements, right? I'm not even going to say wargaming roots because, at some level, there's until we start getting into relatively modern role-playing development styles, like the narrative-driven games, like I'm going to use Band of Blades or Blades in the Dark as an example. There's where the tools you're being given, these both came out of Apocalypse World, by the way, just for clarity. And this idea was not developed by Apocalypse World either. It's just been a favorite engine for a lot of RPG designers in the last several years. Where the mechanical tools are intended to give you the ability to drive the story narratively, rather than trying to sort of simulate a world based on some kind of mechanical logic, which most RPGs had at least attempted to do it to some degree up through the end of the 80s, certainly. We started to see RPGs evolving away from that. A lot of people will point out the Storyteller games from White Wolf as the example of games that tried to drive RPGs in a more narrative direction. But every idea that was present in those games, like Vampire the Masquerade and so on, was also present in Ars Magica, and was even present less explicitly in the original Chivalry and Sorcery, which was released in like 1977. So there's always been a tradition with that, but then Chivalry and Sorcery went and was built on very highly simulationist mechanics too. So But Melee was, and in fact, if you recall, when Steve Jackson Games was still yet to publish GURPS, they published sort of an intro to GURPS called Man to Man, which was the GURPS combat system played on a hex grid with man-to-man things. And was that a war game? Yeah, probably, because it didn't include the RPG end of the game system. Michael Potts asks about definitions of tactical, operational, grand, tactical, strategic. Well, I can tell you that grand tactical doesn't really mean anything in any official way. What it really tends to be used to mean is just either low-level operational, meaning closer to the company level, or high-level tactical, meaning closer to the company level. And I'm talking in this context to be World War II. I would call this grand tactical, but this is brigade level, right? But it's a different period, and this is why it's slippery to define that. And I'd want to look up. I mean, and there are people who have defined this in some official way that work for the Army and the Army War College and stuff like that. I'm going to say Jim Orzowski should tell us because he has more communication with those folks than I do. But strategic games take into account strategic elements like economics and politics beyond the scope of purely and this is a war game definition, purely military affairs, and typically also include quite a few military affairs as well. Tactical games are local games, right? So in some point, if you're playing a tactical game, you should be able to look at the counter and see that counter as some guys, right? Some people on that counter. It's not thousands of people, but it might be dozens of people. It might be like a platoon or company, right? So, but what elements do... I mean, I'd have to define it in terms of the context of the movement system because, I would have to do this. I'm not saying this is the definition. This is just me struggling with a definition of tactical. In a tactical game, you're typically going to be able to project force from a originating unit to a target unit over the span of multiple movement units, say hexes. That's typically going to be the case. Probably not universally true. Operational elements, on the other hand, are going to be things like logistics, right? This is one reason why we have logistics as a major backbone of the operational combat series, because that is an operational element, is getting the beans and bullets to the men who need them. On the other hand, if an element in the game is the manufacture of beans and bullets, then we're talking about a strategic scale. Gunslinger is the Gunslinger a war game? I think a lot of people would probably say no. I would probably say it's close enough. We're talking, of course, about the Avalon Hill Gunslinger. It certainly was a nice box. Interesting components. I think Gilbert Collins has done a video on that, actually. It's a game I always want, like Gladiator. It's a game I always wanted to try, but never did. Catching up on the chat. Battle of Fismus introductory game. If that is the Library of Napoleonic Battles game, I am not sure. I'm not sure I even have that, actually. Those are always, if that is what it is, then there's been a rotating series of introductory games from the Library of Napoleonic Battles series. And I'm not sure which, if any of them, is being offered now. If you actually look at the list of the series on Board Game Geek, you'll see the individual games listed. You see, First Core in this, which is Davu's Core, is enormous. Which makes sense, since he was the finest commander that Napoleon had, but that wasn't Napoleon himself. I guess then the question that begs the question of if tactical is the scale at which we study tactics, what then is strategy? Is that just the scale in which we study strategy? And then then we end up with a circular definition, right? So I don't know that that's super duper helpful. Let's get some guys in the tray. So, commanders. We've elected to put all the various constituents of the Imperial Guard in one tray, which should work fine. And First Corps, Davos First Corps here, however, is so big that might actually be an issue. Maybe not, but... So I always find... Oh, by the way, so I use the GMT trays, and I have been a frequent critic of the DVG deep dish counter trays, which is a nice idea, but the lids don't lock, so they're suitable only for the wastebasket. It turns out that Lock and Load Publishing has deep dish counter trays as well, and theirs actually lock. Mo at Mo's Game Table has done a video on that. Check out his channel. That came out like today. First Cav, fourth Cav. So those are worth looking at, and they actually do what I think is a bit of a cute packaging, where they have the war chest or whatever it's called, and in the war chest comes like it's essentially a printed but functionally blank box, and then there's 3 of those deep dish counter trays in there. I would say that most... Well, shit. I just noticed that I have a misprint on the label. One of these mistyped. 4th Corps is 6th Corps. We are probably not super into fixing that, but we'll see. We will see. 8th Corps. Third Cav. First Cav. Third Cav. I'll probably break down and fix it, actually. There was also in terms of Starship Troopers, there was also Star Soldier from SPI, which I believe... I always felt like the 2 games were reminiscent of one another. Star Soldier, I'm pretty sure, predated Starship Troopers by quite a few years, however. Oh, Patrick's Tactics and Tutorials for all your learning great battles of the Americans, or great campaigns, sorry, even I do it sometimes. Great campaigns the American Civil War needs. It is a great channel. He is doing tons of really, really good content on Great Campaigns the American Civil War, which is a game series that I literally cannot recommend highly enough. So I guess the end of the question, for me at least, is that my optimal scale, which might be different from your optimal scale, is, for me it's dependent on the topic, right? So my optimal scale for Ancients is in fact tactical. My optimal scale for World War II is absolutely operational. For Napoleonic, it's grand tactical. Which is not to say that there's nothing interesting in something like Empires at Arms, which is a fantastic game by reputation, again. So Star Soldier was not sold as being connected to Universe, and it in fact predated Universe by several years. It was included in the Star Force Trilogy soapbox, which also included Star Force and Outreach. But the official universe materials for the Universe RPG, which I just picked one up, I had it years and years ago. I just picked it up again not too long ago, and it's an interesting game in a lot of ways, but it's definitely a different background than the sort of weird space telepath thing that Star Force had going on, which is shared by both Outreach and Star Soldier. So, not to be pedantic. My labels are not printed by DVG. They are printed by me, and therefore I probably don't have that many mistakes on them, but let's see if I can at least get it off without causing a major hassle. I mean, certainly the occasional wasted label is something that occurs. These get printed in sheets, and then the same sheet will get fed through the printer multiple times, typically. These are just the Avery label stock sheets. That's all they are. TPS is up in the TTS workshop. So TTS is Tabletop Simulator. TPS is what? Turning Point Simulations? So I don't even know. So of the three, I had, back in the day, I had the Star Force Trilogy, and it was a thing that got thrown away in a mildew incident. It was stored in a bad place in a basement at some point, and it was not salvageable. Of the three games that were included, I did feel that Star Soldier was the least interesting. Whereas I thought Outreach was the most interesting. I think I have now reacquired Star Force, which I think is a neat game, and Outreach, which I think is a fantastic and really underrated game. Turning Point Stalingrad, okay, that makes sense. I've never played any of those area impulse games, I think they're called. But they are well liked, I know that. That and Storm over Arnhem, and there's now Monty's Gamble and the Normandy one. Breakout Normandy. Whole bunch of them. I don't think I've ever had rutabagas. So... I am sure I don't have like an outline for these things or anything, so if I forget something and I'm now feeling like I have forgotten to mention, yes, okay. So some of you might already know that there is a new community site at Consim World. It is linked in the video description. This is not a new forum for Consim World. The old forums are still there. There was like a sort of a social media site that was never really widely adopted over at the old social media site at Consim World. And they relaunched it, completely rebuilt some time ago. I would encourage you to check it out. It's probably super interesting to you if you are fed up with conventional social media outlets like Facebook. And it actually looks and feels a lot like Facebook. Although it's a lot less cluttered, there's less ads and all that. So check that out. I've also been asked to mention the Tack Up Wargaming group, which is on the Consim World group. There's a Facebook group as well. But if you're annoyed by Facebook, maybe you don't want to deal with that. That group is run by ID Jester, whose channel you may be familiar with and who does some very good quality content. So check those things out. I have, again, included links to both in the video description of this video. So check those out. Starfleet Battles is totally tactical. As is, by extension, something like Wooden Ships and Iron Men. But I would also say that, Flying Colors from GMT, which is a different scale than Wooden Ships and Iron Men. It's more of a fleet actions game. I would also call that tactical. Or a squadron actions game, I would say. Maybe not fleet. You guys are keeping even me on my toes with the acronyms here. So Ken Cloby mentions Thunder Casino is the best area game. He might be right. I haven't played it. And he later says SOA is great, but you should try TAC much richer. SOA would presumably be Storm over Arnhem. All of those are pretty well regarded, though. We have, I think, just about twice as many counters to clip here tonight as we did last week. So we will see how far. So I don't want to stop clipping. We'll see how far we get. Of course, the topic of should you clip your counters came up again on Twitter. Speaking of social media, I guess I'll mention this. I'm going to eventually have a giveaway for this, but we're not close when I hit 2,000 Twitter followers. So if you're on Twitter, there's a link to that in the video description. You'll go ahead and follow me on Twitter. We're going to have a video. We're actually moving up on 4,000 subscribers here at the Ardwulf's Lair channel faster than I had previously anticipated. That will happen unless I completely shit my pants sometime this year, which let's face it, could happen. So that'll be a big deal, and I'm already thinking of giveaway material for that. There will be a major giveaway of stuff when I hit 4,000 subscribers here. Okay, Fourth Corps. This is Fourth Corps on this campaign. So, generally speaking, Napoleon's relatives, meaning his brothers, were not noteworthy for their competence. On the other hand, Napoleon's sort of, I don't know if adopted son is the right term, but Josephine's son, Eugène, was very competent, and this campaign was the campaign in which he demonstrated that. Never was given a marshal's baton, which was probably unfortunate and was more competent than a lot of the people who did have marshal's batons. Let me put it that way. We're squeaking again. I have heard it said, to what extent this is true, I'm not even sure, that any nation, or culture if you like, that names their ships he has a crappy navy. That might in fact be true. I don't know. Certainly examples abound of such countries not performing well, but again, opposed to the British and American navies. And of course, the tradition of naming ships she was handed to the Americans by the British. However, it is ultimately derived from Latin, in that the Latin word for, so Latin is one of those languages where everything has a gender. There are neuter words, but and gender is not natural gender, but most things have a gender that is either male or female. Sometimes neuter, but a lot of times it's, ships were female, and that is how that was handed down. Phil, thanks for stopping by. Of course, this will be up for later perusal for anybody who wants to listen to it after the fact. Presumably while mulching or something like that. So, we have close to an hour to go. So, we might run a little bit over tonight depending on how I'm doing with the counters. If I got tons of additional counters, I will call it at 10-ish. And if I am almost done, then I might stick it out and keep going. And we notice that the thing has started to squeak again, irritatingly. Guards, cavalry. Dutch guys, looks like. So the color of the counter does represent the nationality of the unit. And in this series. And that does mean that you'll sometimes see guys like this. These red guys who are the Poles who served under Poniatowski in this particular campaign. All-time high live stream, I think we went over 90. I'm not sure whether that was last week or the week before. So, but we have, generally speaking, the like average trending viewers on these things has continued to climb. We hit 70 viewers very early on this time, and we have not always done that. Sometimes it's an hour and a half in, and we hit the high. So we'll see how far we get today. But I'm always, even if the number is not necessarily higher than last week or whatever, I'm always looking at the statistic after the stream and saying, "Wow, all those people came by and listened to me yammer on for 2 hours of flipping counters." Yeah, I forget what the exact number is. It might be 92 is the number that sounds correct, but it was over 90, I can tell you that. So what else is going on? I haven't really done anything. So on the digital channel, now that I mention that, I am not positive that I have a link to the digital channel where I do video games in the video description, but if I don't, then I should. It is at Ardwulf Digital. And it's not a super active channel, right? I'll do like a spurt of videos, and then I won't do anything for 8 months at a time. And I haven't done anything for some time. I played a lot of World of Warcraft when Shadowlands came out. And for about a month before Shadowlands came out is when I started. I got a couple characters up to what was then the new level cap of 60 or 50. And then Shadowlands came out, picked that up, played that for about 2 or 3 weeks before I got sick of it. I found that the progression in Shadowlands is basically completely tied to progress in Torghast and the Maw, and I found both experiences to be eminently unpleasant. They have since changed that. I am not especially thinking of returning at this time. So, Kaiser Bill, good one. So I've been kind of popping in on a couple different massively multiplayer online RPG type things. I poked in at Lord of the Rings Online, for example, which is a game that has a lot to go for it, I guess, but it's very ugly by modern standards. And the combat is it has exemplifies all the worst things about MMO tab targeting combat, in that it's very sluggish, and the class design is not great. Nevertheless, it's got a lot of cool Lord of the Rings flavor and all that, and is well done in some other respects, so I don't want to sound too bitchy about it. I tried Final Fantasy XIV, which is a game that a lot of people like, and did not stick. They have a new trial, which is basically the original game, and then if you want to continue playing after the original game's content, you buy an expansion or something like that. And I tried it and played it for a total of about 3 hours over the course of a few days, and it just wasn't working for me. So we uninstalled that. I have not uninstalled Lord of the Rings Online, although I haven't touched it. I'll get to that in a second, too. And I am playing a little bit of Guild Wars 2. That is a game that I played when it came out. I bought it. I played enough of it to hit the level cap at the time, which is something that I typically can't say. So I think it's a quite strong game in a lot of ways. But then I got away from it and didn't touch it for years. So I'm kind of coming back to it, and a lot of changes have been made. And I think it holds up pretty well. I'm reasonably pleased with it. A viewer donated to me a key for the expansion, so I can do the expansion stuff. The expansions add mounts and stuff. So that's kind of cool. Stigler, I'll be here when you get back. So here is my Library of Napoleonic Battles tray, and I have a edge label here, but I haven't made a label for the inside top yet, because sometimes these things morph as I continue to work on them. But this thing's pretty full, so I don't think it's going to morph at all. And I am pretty sure that I have enough of every single kind of counter in here already, to be honest. Yeah, I think that's true. Where are the check counters? Oh, there's somewhere here. Anyway, this has been big enough, so I have already set aside the series markers for. Ooh, I need that. That's the turn marker. The series markers for Napoleon against Russia. So I don't know if I got this out when we started. So as I was going through these things in the wake of getting Napoleon invade Spain, I found to my surprise that Napoleon against Russia was not punched and clipped. All the rest of them were. And I thought I had gotten to all of them, and apparently I hadn't. So. Okay, quickly bounce on the chat. No, we'll be back to Traveler Tuesday at some point, but that will come back when I have, like, news. Stigler asks if he wonders how the Bulge got so popular topically when it sucks for balance. That is a challenge when looking at and designing and playing a Bulge game, is that how do you balance it? Because I mean, the stated objectives of the Germans retaking Antwerp was completely hopeless. And in fact, most times, it's very difficult for the Germans to reach a reasonable victory condition, which would be like reaching the Meuse and holding there. Either the game throws historicity away, or the game ends up not being balanced, or the victory conditions end up structured such that the Germans can be repulsed in a way they were historically repulsed, but they can hang on more successfully than they did historically and get a victory that way. In some cases, that doesn't feel to some players like a victory in the game. So, anyway, I did a video. I've started playing in a very cursory way Elite Dangerous again. Behind the other side of this, there's my throttle and stick. I did also try, somebody gave me a copy of Star Wars Squadrons for Christmas, and I had been watching video on it, and I'm like, ooh, that looks cool, and I tried it, and it doesn't work with my HOTAS, which means the reason I would want to play it is literally not functional. So, it has unfortunately been uninstalled. I might try it at a later time with my other HOTAS. But in the meantime, I simply, that is a problem that I don't have with Elite Dangerous, which is designed to work with the throttle and stick. I did try Gloria Victis, and I liked what I saw, but it was I believe it's still in early access, and when I tried it was like 3 years ago, so it was very early access. It has changed and evolved a lot since then. It is probably worth a look again at this point. It promised interesting crafting, which it was not delivering when I tried it. So there is I believe, a Kickstarter for the Stellaris board game from Academy Games. So Academy Games has done some stuff that I have a pretty high opinion of, and they have a lot of stuff that is not of interest to me for various reasons. I say this as somebody who has dropped, I think, well over 100 hours into the Stellaris video game over the years, which I don't have all the DLC, is kind of the thing I stay away from, reason I stay away from it now. But I have a pretty high opinion of Paradox in general as a company. They've got their foibles too. And Stellaris in particular, I already have games that are board games type games that occupy a very similar space to what a Stellaris board game would do. Meaning Twilight Imperium and Eclipse and things like that. And I don't see offhand what a Stellaris board game would give me that those games don't, other than the fact that it has a marketing tie-in with the video game that I've put a lot of time into. So I don't have a strong opinion, not having investigated the announcements or anything like that. So bear that in mind. I'm not saying this from a chair where I know what I'm talking about. But I'm not super interested. Let me put it that way. I would just as soon just play the video game, which has another expansion coming out sometime in the next couple of months. So I actually do think John Longshore's onto something with that. I do think that part of the reason... Ooh, this is a problem. Part of the reason why... We're going to have to take this apart. There is a strong history of bulge games in the history of wargaming is the fact that it is a uniquely American battle. I know Monty came in at the end and tried to claim credit for it, and even at the time was slapped down for that. So I think that's part of it. So Poniatowski's core is the 5th core? Yeah. Or Poniatowski, I believe, is actually accurate. 4th core. Oh, they're all over the place. So these poles are serving in more than one core here. There's even a unit of poles in the a brigade of poles in the Young Guard. I will say that I like the Stellaris video game quite a bit. It is a very appealing game in ways that that sort of 4X genre of video games sometimes aren't. In that there's sort of a 4X phase that happens at the beginning of the game where you're expanding and taking over as much territory as you can, and then it evolves into a more traditional for paradox grand strategy phase where you're sort of interacting a lot with other powers, and then in the end game there is a menace of I don't know that this is what it's called, but a menace of some kind that you then have to deal with, whether that's like invasion, extragalactic invaders or extra dimensional invaders or Dyson swarms or whatever, or von Neumann swarms, I should say. 4th Cavalry. Wow. Black print on dark red. Thanks, Kevin. That was poorly planned. So, Tony Mammal mentions that there's a Humble Bundles for Stellaris, which I haven't seen that, but Stellaris goes on sale all the time on Steam. So, if you just exercise a small amount of patience, you will be able to get Stellaris for probably $5 or less at some point. Europa Universalis board game. Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. So Europa Universalis was a board game, or war game if you like, that was produced back in the 90s, I think, by Azure Wish Publications. There's a French publisher, which had a lot of really fairly legendary game designs. Well, some of the principles at Azure Wish ended up being some of the principles at Paradox, and they took, and among other things, they took Europa Universalis and turned it into a successful series of video games, which I have played. I have not played the board game. The board game looks to me, from what I've seen of it, like sort of an evolution of Empires of the Middle Ages, which is something I'd like to do video on at some point, because I do have the decision version of Empires of the Middle Ages, and it looks okay. I mean, it's, you know, it's another one of these, basically a straight SPI reprint. We need to refill that. You would be getting more Scotch commentary each week if I could afford more Scotch. This is American. This is made in Colorado, actually. And I bought it while I was out in Colorado. And it's pretty good. So I'm happy I bought it. I bought it at Costco, actually. Alright. So, these poles, the red poles, are constituents of multiple cores here. Master of Orion was a classic, and that's been redone as well. And from what I understand, it was not redone well. There was a new version of SimCity released a few years ago that released to a resounding thud. The game I played a little bit of a few weeks ago was Cities Skylines, which is a very similarly themed city builder, also from Paradox. The complaint that I guess people have with Paradox is that they tend to offload too much stuff into DLC. And that DLC can be expensive if you buy it when it comes out. Now, it always goes on sale at some point. Paradox is very good about putting their stuff on sale. You know, I thought about that, but I don't want people to take the assumption that Grumbling Grognard says Patreon for better Scotch. So I am happy with the quality of my Scotch. It's just that I've only got about 3 bottles of Scotch, and I don't want to be drinking the same 3 bottles every week. Understand that pretty much all the drinking I do is here on this stream. So it's not like I'm drinking up all the Patreon money, right? Such as it is. I have not seen Pulsar Lost Colony on Steam. Or at least it's not ringing a bell for me. Let me put it that way. So next week, my goal for the off week is to, or I should say between shows, is to either take this apart and clean it and lubricate it again, or failing that, to next week clip something that I can clip with a different clipper. Although my 2.5mm clipper is also squeaking now, because I clipped a lot of stuff with it. I clipped, I think, 3 GTS games with it, and it is also a bit squeaky now. So this is probably fairly irritating. My wife this drives her crazy. So after the French, the Poles were the largest contingent of Napoleon's army. Yes, absolutely. And that's exactly what I see here. They're all over the place. They're members. There's a 5th Corps, which is mostly Poles. And then there's Polish cavalry. There's a Polish brigade in 3rd Corps. There's a whole bunch more Polish cavalry. There's even 2 brigades of Poles in the Young Guard. So yes, absolutely. So, yeah, I really do feel like the Hexes and Soldiers mentions, thanks for doing these shows, it creates a fun space for the community. And I feel like that must be true, or else we wouldn't have, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 people here every Monday. Also, don't want to overstay my welcome like by doing this every night or anything like that. So Dan talked me into his, but that's it's a 1-hour thing. It's gonna like rotate between channels. One week I'll have it, the next week he'll have it. We'll kind of do it till we run out of topics at least. So, and certainly I never have a shortage of things to say. So there are, at some point I should actually do another video on this. So there are 2 screws, and there's the 2 screws that hold this thing together, and then there's this central pivot point, and then there's these 2 pivot points. This central pivot and these 2 are rivets, not screws. They have all been oiled relatively recently. single malt Scotch for someone who's only had blends before. So the big question is, do you like the smoky Scotch? If you do, then I'm going to recommend Highland Park. If you don't, I'm going to recommend Macallan. Now, the problem with Macallan is that it is, more so than other Scotch, really, really, really inflated in price over the course of the last several years. A 12-year-old standard expression Macallan now runs about $80 here in Ohio, which frankly I think is a ludicrous price. In its way, I don't buy Macallan anymore. But it's the only reason I don't like Macallan. I don't buy Macallan. I like Macallan a lot. It was the Scotch that sold me on Scotch. Let's say I had, as a teenager, I had a negative Scotch experience. So, and that's about all I will say about that. You can fill in the blanks with your imagination, if you will. And it does sort of have a distinct flavor that some people associate. It's not the smokiness, though. It's the fact that it's malt. It's malted barley, which is not the case with most American whiskey. That's what gives it the distinct flavor. There are a huge variety of different Scotches. There's something like 100 and some different distilleries in Scotland, some of which produce smoky Scotch and some of which produce Scotch with no smoke at all. I find Glenmorangie to be perfectly good Scotch, but a lot of people consider it a little bit rough. I don't like to necessarily recommend Glenmorangie for that reason. I like it, but some people, like I said, it's not particularly expensive. And Toil, we'll see. Somebody needs to send me Dave's email address, which I don't have. David was with us last week, so David is doing some very, very interesting design work, and I would personally be delighted if David would join us. So, Wardrobe, thanks for stopping by. Yeah, so I do think I was kind of getting at this. I think this has become sort of like a community hangout, right? Rather than necessarily a just watch me clip encounters. Because I have no, idea that I'm that friggin' charismatic. I mean, let's face it. So I just like to talk, which kind of gives the group that comes in something to talk about, and that's great. But I don't think looking at my mug is necessarily what's bringing people in. So I think it is the sense of community that people are here for. Auchentoshan is interesting in that it is a lowland Scotch. There are very few lowland distilleries. Glenkinchie is another one. If you're interested in a Scotch that is not smoky at all, the standard Auchentoshan is one such Scotch. Highland Park, the standard I think it's a 12-year Highland Park the distillery is in the Orkney Islands, and they have a whole line of Viking-themed Scotches. And the basic expression, though, is notable in that it is aged in sherry casks, while it is also somewhat smoked. The smoke flavor comes from the way the malted barley is traditionally dried, which in Scotland, at least parts of Scotland, happened over a peat fire. So, although Islay, the island off the west coast of Scotland, is best known for its smoky Scotch, those distilleries on that coast also tend to be relatively smoky, like Oban, for example. Or on the other islands, like the island of Skye or the island of Jura. Skye, the only distillery on the island of Skye is Talisker, which is very good. And yes, I am talking about smoked peat. And I like the smoky whiskeys, which is why my favorite Scotch is the one we were drinking last week, which is Kalila. I noticed that the price on Lagavulin has not gone up in the last couple of years here in Ohio, presumably because it was already $30 overpriced. I like Lagavulin a lot, but I don't buy it because of it's $100 a bottle. And I think that's $96 a bottle here for the 16-year-old. I think it's 16. Or is it 12? No, I think it's 16-year-old Lagavulin. It's good, but Kalila 12 is almost as good, and it's about 60 a bottle. So I'll save the $30. So a lot of folks don't like the smokiness, either because of the smoke or because they think it tastes like an ashtray, or because of the sort of medicinal taste. And which of those notes is prominent depends on the distillery, right? So I find that you get a much more medicinal taste out of Kalila than it tastes like licking an ashtray, which is the thing that a lot of people say. And then there's Lefroy, which is another favorite, which is another Islay Scotch. I mean, I could do a show about this. And in fact, maybe we will. Maybe we will do Scotch. But if so, then I'll have a couple of different Scotches to talk about and not just one thing. Diet Coke. I will say, when I drink soda now, I do drink diet soda, but I don't drink much soda and never really have. I know the Chief has his own whiskey show. Which I think is a whiskey show. The Scotch Test Dummies is the channel. That's Bart Brunchine from Bonding with Board Games and Hamtag has a whiskey channel called Scotch Test Dummies. So if you're into that, go check him out. There's a whole bunch of good Scotch channels, though. All right, let's catch up here. So the interesting thing, let me circle back to John Frieson's question about single malt. The interesting thing about single malt is not that they are better necessarily. It is that they give you a sense of the distillery. So they're more interesting in that sense, in that I'm tasting a specific distillery's expression. In a blend, it's blended to become drinkable. So they're going to put all kinds of whatever they got in that and turn it into something drinkable. While I certainly don't object to blends, there's nothing wrong with them necessarily. And I bought a bottle of Darkest Grouse or Blackest Grouse, which is the peatier famous grouse, which is not only a blend, it's a cheap blend, and it is was very palatable. So the thing is that blends can be cheaper. They're not necessarily cheaper, but they can be cheaper. So it's more interesting to drink a single malt, I think, because you're getting a sense of that distillery. But there's nothing wrong with blends per se. I will have to check that. Henry, I will have to check that out. Leonard DeBello says Bowmore 12. Okay, so I have had 2 Bowmore expressions ever. One is Bowmore Legend. The other is what wasn't labeled as Bowmore. It's labeled as McClellan's with a D. But it's owned by Morrison Bowmore, and it's their Islay Scotch, which means that it's Bowmore. And in both cases, they both have a distinctly Bowmore-esque off flavor that I do not like, and that you cannot even water away. It is possible, and I have heard that the better Bowmore expressions are good, but the 2 I have had are not particularly good. Now, that said, McClellan's costs something like $24 a bottle for a single malt Scotch, which is incredibly cheap, and which does have a giant smoky punch in the face. So if that is what you are after, and that's how much money you have to spend, then I don't necessarily say don't buy McClellan's, but you're better off with Blackest Grouse, I think. It tastes better. Oh, I'll mention, yeah, it's cool. Thanks for stopping by, first of all, Tony. On ID Jester's channel tomorrow at 8:30 p.m. Eastern. When I first read the announcement, I read it as AM, and I'm like, boy, that's ambitious. They're going to be playing Cuba Libre over at ID Jester's place, so check that out tomorrow. This is annoying. Okay, so I hadn't finished the video game talk yet. So I did a video about coming back to Elite Dangerous with a new account. At some point a couple months ago, I think, the Epic Games Store was offering Elite Dangerous for free. So I said, sure. They actually give something away for free every week, and it's normally some garbage. But like during the holidays when they're trying to drive traffic, they give away good stuff. So I've got about 30 free games through the Epic Games Store. This is the first one I've ever actually installed. You do need to run, if you buy Elite Dangerous through the Epic Games Store, you have to run it through the Epic Launcher. You can't even have a desktop shortcut for it. It won't work. It will fail to register. So it's a little bit of a pain. So I actually have 2 copies of Elite Dangerous installed right now. ID Jester, I don't know that he streams on Twitch, but he definitely streams on YouTube. If you search for ID Jester, you'll see it. Tony, if you got the link, you can throw it in the chat. That's cool. Or at least a link to the channel. Let's see here. Second Corps, Third Corps. All these Russian names. Oy. There is I think I knew about this, but I was reminded of this. There is an old BBC miniseries, 12-part miniseries called Fall of Eagles, which, you know, has, I guess, historicity problems, but I forget when it was made. It looks like a 70s production to me, maybe 60s. But it's got some interesting casting, like a young Patrick Stewart as Lenin, for example, which is interesting. And it's about the fall of World War I, the situation that culminated, I turned that off, in World War I with the fall of the 3 Eagles of Austria, Hungary, Germany, and Russia. So it's got like all the British actors that you would want in it. John Rhys Davies is in it. Patrick Stewart is in it. The entire cast of I, Claudius, I believe, is in it. Michael Hordern is in it. The guy whose name I just looked, Michael Guff, who played Alfred in the Michael Keaton Batman movies, is in it. A whole bunch of people are in that thing. Ken Burnside, thanks Ken for stopping by. New version of Harpoon. Is that Harpoon 5 or is that a new version post Harpoon 5? Because if so, I didn't know about it. What the fuck? What even was that? I have no idea. So, I think it was Popeye sending me an advertisement for their chicken sandwich, which is excellent. This clipper makes no noise? I mean, I think it makes noise. So this is the 2mm standard Oregon Laminations corner rounder. If you search for it on Amazon, you will find it. You can also buy it directly from Oregon Laminations, in which case you will pay less money. I unloaded in that estate that fell into my lap. A whole bunch of Harpoon stuff was in that lot, and I unloaded it to Mountain Navy, I believe, who was delighted by the whole thing. And I just didn't even want to try to take Harpoon apart, to be honest. I would, if I were going to play a game like, if I was sufficiently interested in that topic, I would choose to play Command Modern Operations, the PC game. which is a very impressive looking game, and which is fairly well regarded. Missing Seattle says the only Bowmore to drink is Bowmore 25. Expensive, but very good. Yeah, see, you can't even get that in Ohio. So, because all liquor is sold through the state of Ohio, that means that either a lot of distilleries don't want to deal with that, or the state doesn't want to deal with specific distillery expressions that aren't going to be around in 6 months. So anything that's, generally speaking, anything that's hard to get is just not available here. That said, if you go to Pennsylvania, and they have a very similar selection. Kentucky does not. Kentucky you can get a whole lot of stuff in Kentucky. In fact, there's a, right across the Ohio River from Cincinnati in Kentucky, there is a place called the Party Source, which is basically a Kmart-sized liquor store that has everything you would possibly want. I mean, obviously they have an amazing bourbon selection, because that's what they do in Kentucky. And the prices on bourbon are noticeably cheaper than they are in Ohio. Their Scotch selection is a lot better than I get in Ohio. And the prices on Scotch are about the same. Some stuff's a little more, some stuff's a little less. First core. Burden of Command PC game. Is that not out yet? I thought that was out. I could be wrong. Yeah, PA, you got weird laws in PA too. I mean, up until relatively recently, you had to go buy your beer from the beer barn. That is weird. There's an entire formation of Cossacks here, by the way, which is cool. I am going to have to look up the order of battle on this to sort these back out of the trays, because actually, no, I'm not. So I got to actually have these. There's two different Russian armies, and this lighting makes it very difficult to tell the difference. But there's actually two different colors of green here. There's Bagration's Russian army, and there's Barclay de Tolly's Russian army. And then both armies are there at Borodino under Kutuzov. So, very difficult. I managed mostly to not swear the pants off the stream. So I am a believer, and I think everybody that probably would agree with this, and yet a lot of people fail to live it sometimes. I feel that profanity is best used sparingly. If you are constantly swearing, it loses its impact when you do swear. So, again, it's sometimes we all let ourselves down with that kind of thing. Toads Suck Arkansas. That's great. Pappy Van Winkle. All right, so Ken mentions Free League does Tales from the Loop, the Aliens RPG. I'd forgotten about the Aliens RPG, and Forbidden Lands. They're all about burning through equipment as a stress clock. I like that they're doing this for T2K. I didn't get that. I haven't played Forbidden Lands. That's the only one of those that I have. I didn't think that Forbidden Lands used that as a mechanism, but I could be nuts. Certainly, that is a thing that I have seen in a couple of different games. What's it called? Poop. Torchbearer does that as well. Yeah, Fall of the Eagles is on YouTube, by the way. I believe all 12 episodes are on YouTube. And if you're a fan of that sort of BBC type of programming in that period, then it looks really good. So there was in part driven by the whiskey boom there, and there is a whiskey boom, which is also contributing to the rise in prices, as well as the trade war that we started with various enemy countries like Scotland. There was a big rush on Pappy Van Winkle, which was a really small small batch wheated whiskey. I haven't tried it. I've talked to people who have, and I have the sense that it is overrated, that like serious whiskey people think it's good and all, but are not. I mean, nobody's. I'm not gonna pay $5,000 for a bottle of anything, so I'm not gonna pay $500 for a bottle of anything. I will occasionally drop $100 on a bottle every once in a while, but even then, that's a big thing to ask nowadays. German is the finest language to swear in. I mean, there's nobody arguing that. I mean, that's obvious. It's also the best language to shout at in, to be honest. I mean, whether you're swearing or not. Also, German has a word for absolutely everything. German has a word, Sitzpinkler, which is a derogatory name for a man who sits down to pee. So we do, in fact, have a word for everything in German. We're about to revisit the tray here. It does look like we are doing pretty good as far as pacing, getting this thing done. I'd like to get it done. That'd be awesome. I'm waiting on the Cossacks. This is the 8th Corps. Nathan Landrum asks, do we have any suggestions for strategic Franco-Prussian war games? So, the one that rings... the one I can think of... So, there's an old S&T game called Franco-Prussian War, oddly enough, that is not exactly a classic, but it's held. There's some people that liked it, and you could probably get it reasonably inexpensively, and it is probably worth your time to investigate it on that basis. However, you might also check out, what is it called? The recent relatively recent, is in the last couple of years. I'm gonna have to look this up, aren't I? From Compass Games. Compass Games did a Franco-Prussian War game. Did they just redo the website? That's confusing. On to Paris. I forget who the designer is, but it basically uses the Victory Games Civil War system to do the Franco-Prussian War. And I know some people bounced off, some of the local people tried it and bounced off of it, but there are also people that like it, so I think that's probably worth your time, and that or worth a look at least. And the Victory Games Civil War system is a great system that has a lot to recommend it. So that's where I would look for Franco-Prussian War. Metz 1870 is an operational game as far as I know. That is a Herman Lettman game. I believe uses the blind sword system, but it's a different permutation of that system than he uses for Civil War stuff. I don't have an opinion on Metz 1870. It's from GMT. I know about it, but Stegler has picked up a copy of Jaws of Victory, Corson Pocket, January, February 1944. Looks interesting. Somebody was asking me about that on Twitter, either today or yesterday, and about whether to get that or the Third Winter. And I mean, my answer was they're really quite different. Jaws of Victory uses the old SPI Victory in the West system, or at least a variation thereof. I have an unboxing of it if you want to see it. The components are beautiful. It is a very attractive package. It is on the Corson Cherasky Pocket, so again, it's January, February 1944. The Third Winter, and Jaws of Victory is a fairly large game, by the way. I think it's 2 maps, I think. It's been a while since I did the unboxing. And it's, I think, 3 or 4 counter sheets. Now, Third Winter is like 10 counter sheets, including marker sheets, and it's 4 maps. And it covers all of the Ukraine between September 1943 and April 1944. So that Coruscant pocket situation, and there's a scenario for this, is in there. And there is a whole dedicated Coruscant pocket scenario that plays on a mini map. But the game also covers a lot of other stuff too. It is a beautiful package. The New England Simulations did a really nice job with that. It really feels like sort of SPI done right. It's a really nice package. It's got a really nice feel to it. The counters feel fantastic. They have a matte finish on the counters, which I really like and which is very unusual nowadays. The only companies I'm aware of, off the top of my head, I might be forgetting about somebody, that do matte finish counters are New England Simulations and Thin Red Line Games. And Thin Red Line Games does it by putting a strange plastic coating on their counters, which causes them to clip weirdly. There really haven't been that many games on the Franco-Prussian War, however. I want to say that... No, I'm thinking of the 7 Years' War. So there's the well-regarded No Peace Without Spain series from Compass Games. That includes No Peace Without Spain and 9 Years and A Pragmatic War. Apparently there's another game in the pipeline that uses that system to tackle the 7 Years' War, which I think is going to be something to look at. That's an interesting looking game system. I bought all 3 at Compass Expo 2 years ago, and ended up getting rid of 2 of them, but I kept No Peace Without Spain, which is the War of the Spanish Succession, which is a fairly interesting topic. Pragmatic War is the War of the Austrian Succession, and 9 Years is the War of the Grand Alliance, or the 9 Years' War, or I think the War of the League of Augsburg. So they're all interesting topically, but for some reason I think I ended up giving them away as part of a pay it forward. I think I a bit regret that, but I'm glad I kept No Peace Without Spain because that's the one I wanted to try. I don't know if it's anti-clipping, but I mean, certainly if you're playing the big 1985 stuff, you're going to have they're more or less anyway. They're half-inch counters, and your density is going to be quite high. So if you want to not clip that, I mean, you know, there is the answer to I don't want to clip my counters is to play on Vassal, where you don't have to worry about it, and you're not going to knock a stack over. All right, let's get back to the... put these in the tray. Okay, Russian 8th Corps. And the corps are not in numerical order. They are in order by army. So... Corps, 2nd and 3rd Corps. Napoleon's, I don't know about at Borodino, where it was relatively evenly matched, but I might have to redo the Russians here. That's possible. Well, we have to do it. We have to do it. It's okay. Not like that's never happened before. Actually circled back, after last week, actually circled back to one of the previous games in the series that I was unhappy with the organization of and reorganized it, using what I learned from punching and clipping and organizing Napoleon Invades Spain. That old chestnut, you know what? Maybe you're right. Who cares? You are playing, even if you are playing it as a video game, if you want to put it that way, you are playing a board game in some sense, even if you're playing it as a video game. We will figure this out at some point. Kenneth Cloby. So is Jaws of Victory out of print? Because I haven't checked on that, but it certainly wouldn't surprise me if it were. I would say that if New England Simulations is one company where if you are interested in their whatever it is, get it when comes out, because you're probably going to have a hard time finding it after that. Oops. Two. Center nibs are the worst of the worst, as we all know. So, that Stellaris board game is not the first example of that, right? There's been a whole bunch of video games getting turned into board games in recent years. I thought that Europa Universalis thing was already out, to be honest. There's that. There's other examples as well that I can't think of right now. I mean, if you're going to play them, there's no difference between, in terms of how clipping affects the value of the game, as long as you don't clip like a jackass. I don't think there's a difference between the game's punched and has unclipped counters, or it's punched and has clipped counters. At least if we're using a corner rounder, right? If you're using scissors or something crazy like that, then that might make a difference. I don't think it makes a difference to the valuation of the game. So, I will clip everything. I should talk about that. So we wrapped up the Hungarian Rhapsody game. We called it a German victory just because Soviets just kind of ran out of time. We didn't have clear enough objectives or a good enough understanding of the operational situation at the beginning of the game. So we wrapped it and we set up the Blitzkrieg Legend, which is France 1940. So that's our new OCS game, and we start playing that tomorrow night. My optional scale, I'll circle back to that. My optional scale, my optimal scale preference, it depends on the topic. If the topic is ancients, I prefer tactical. If it's Civil War, I prefer operational. If it's World War II, I prefer operational. I mean, if I had to pick strategic, tactical, or operational, I'd probably pick operational for that reason. I sometimes lament the lack of operational options on a particular topic. Ancients is another one. It's hard to find operational Ancients games, and the good ones that I'm aware of are years out of print and hard to get. So that's the Ancient World series from GMT and Richard Berg. There's also Imperium Romanum, which is back in print now from Decision. And I do have the Decision version, and I had Imperium Romanum 2 from West End Games. And other than improved graphics, there's not, and several additional scenarios, there's not much of a difference. I don't object to anyone buying the Decision Games version, let me put it that way. You can get Twilight Struggle on the PC. You can also get it on mobile, which might be more attractive for some people. At one point, I thought about getting it for mobile because then I could play it on the bus. But then I stopped taking the bus. So I agree with Stigler on this in that I think Vassal is a perfectly viable way, for some people, a more viable way to play war games than playing them face-to-face on a table. I've also said many times that I would prefer to play a physical copy. I like the tactility of a war game. But sometimes you can't. Sometimes, and for some people, that's not an option, right? What if you live in the middle of North Dakota, right? I mean, you just you don't know any wargamers. Well, then off to Vassal you go. You can find people, because you can tap into a worldwide market for games. You can find. So let's say, for example, I actually pitched this when we wrapped up Hungarian Rhapsody. Hey, why don't we play the Devil's Cauldron? That's cool. I like it. One of the other two people liked it. The other guy's like, no, I hate that system. So I can't get a GTS game going, at least with the three people we got going on right now. We can't get a GTS game going. On the other hand, I could whip up a GTS game by next Monday if I wanted to, using Vassal. And for that matter, the Vassal modules for GTS are outstanding. So, if that's a factor for you. I've managed to cock up the... how can you catch them cheating? So if you're playing with people that you're... My answer to this is the blanket answer. I listened to a podcast the other day called Single Malt Strategy, which is done by a guy who has a YouTube channel called The Historical Gamer. And I like his channel. I'm subscribed to his channel, and I've watched a bunch of his playthroughs. And he's like, hey, I'm playing this game, and it's this weird thing where I don't know if the guy's cheating or not, because we're just passing these files back and forth. And I don't know if he's opening it up and looking at my stuff before he runs his turn or what. It struck him as weird, but I'm going to say that if you are concerned about whether the people you are playing with are cheating or not, that you are playing with the wrong people. I mean, I don't want to play with cheating people either, but if I find that somebody's cheating, I'll either boot them from the group or I will leave if it comes to that. On the other hand, everybody knows I don't cheat because I'd be doing a lot better if I was cheating. Now, I also understand for somebody like me that spends a crap load of time in front of the computer anyway, a reluctance to spend even more time playing games in front of the computer. I get that. That makes sense to me as well. But at the same time... it's a really good option. And frankly, there are some games that are a lot easier to deal with on Vassal than it is the physical components. I posted a picture, I think it was an OCS picture, and somebody, aren't there stacking limits in that game? There's 15 counters in that hex. Well, yeah, okay, so, I mean, in this case, they're mostly supply counters, but... if you're really concerned about that, or if you have a legitimate, really high-density game like a Europa game, maybe... you should play on Vassal because A, you don't have to spend any time tearing it down, and if it's a good module, you don't have to spend much time setting it up either, and you don't have to worry about knocking stacks over. You can zoom in if you can't see. You don't have to worry about glare on the plexiglass or anything like that. There's a lot to recommend Vassal. And again, I like the tactility of playing with physical pieces as well. So I get that, and that is my preference. But at the same time, I'm not going to begrudge anybody playing on Vassal. I think Vassal is a great tool for hex and counter wargamers. I am reasonably convinced that we are not going to finish Napoleon against Russia this evening. So, I'm going to call the actual clipping task completed for now. And then, I'll put these away. I'm confused by Russian 8th Corps. I don't see where and maybe I thought of this, but I don't see where I saved a space for First Corps, Russian 1st Corps. I see 2nd and 3rd. 1st Corps would be with the 2nd Army. So let's look at this. So these games give you these setup sheets that are a bit old-fashioned. Okay. 1st Corps. All right, here's 1st Army. 2nd Corps, 3rd Corps, 4th Corps, 5th Corps, 6th Corps, some cavalry. I don't even see these. I'm confused. Well, so Kaiser Bill, that's another thing. If look, so I said this on Dan's show actually, and I've said it here before too, but I'll say it again because I think it's worth repeating. I don't have time to do the stuff I want to do, right? I don't have enough time to invest in the games I like to play. I have zero time to complain about stuff that somebody else has fun with. Zero time for that. There is just no use in that. So, not that anybody's doing that here necessarily, but I don't see any value in that. So this is 1st Cavalry. Let's see this 5th Corps though. That's the thing. I don't see this on the order of battle at all. Why am I confused? No, I do. It's in 1st Army. Oh, there it is. Okay. Now I remembered how I did this. It is 4th through 6th Corps, not 4th and 6th Corps. And we're going to baggy these for now, because these are the ones I think I messed up. So, I mean, I agree that I would rather see the vast expanse of the map and the stacks of the counters and all that stuff. And even the overstacks of counters, like one we'll see in say Fire in the East or something like that, and the grognards hunched over the table with their tweezers and stuff. I mean, that speaks to me, right? I love that. But at the same time, if there's a variety of reasons why Vassal might be a better option for any individual player, and if using Vassal is what it takes to have them do an Hexacounter Wargames, then I'm all for go Vassal. Go for that. And again, there's certainly times when it's easier. Certainly as somebody that makes videos, it's a lot easier to do videos on Vassal than it is to set the physical pieces up. It's a lot easier. So I spend a crap ton of time in front of a computer, right? I did when I, was doing it for a living and even outside of that, then I can understand maybe not wanting to absolutely maximize that. I get that. That makes sense to me. But at the same time, like I said, sometimes that's your option. And most people probably spend less time in front of a computer than I do. So let's talk about what's coming. So hopefully, I don't think I'm going to have it for tomorrow, but maybe this week, but definitely by next week, we should see the next Harn video. I'm going to have a traveler announcement at some point for sometime around the weekend would be optimal for me to do the next sale video. So there will be a video for that. And then if I have, and there's a bunch of good stuff. So stay tuned for the video sale, which we'll be trying to, again, trying to unload stuff for reasonable prices rather than to try and squeeze every last cent out of whoever's buying them. So, we're going to touch on that. What did our number look like today? Looks like our high was 84. This number sometimes changes between now and tomorrow when the thing goes live again. We still have 62 people. 84 is a spectacular number. 62 is a spectacular number. And honestly, even like 10 minutes in, we had over 50 people. So, I'd like to thank everybody for coming by. Or say again, if you'd like to support the channel, please do check out either the Patreon that's linked in the video description, or if you want like t-shirts and coffee mugs. I'm very happy with the coffee mugs and the t-shirts actually. So t-shirts. This is one of the new Teespring t-shirts. I tried t-shirts with a different provider like a year and a half ago, and let's say they did not come out to my satisfaction. And it wasn't until I set it up with Teespring where I was happy with the shirts. And of course, it's not free to do this, right? I need like a sample shirt or two to test it out. And if the shirts are crap, then I was not happy with that. But these Teespring shirts I really like. They're available in a bunch of different handsome colors, and there's coffee mugs, which I'm also really happy with. So at some point, the mug's upstairs. At some point, I'll remember to have the mug here during the stream. It's not suitable for Scotch, but so what? So check those things out. Do subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed, and please do click the little bell icon to get notified when content comes out. That it really helps with the algorithm. Please do comment and like the videos and stuff like that. Do that for YouTube channels that you like, not just mine. I mean, I'm happy I'm happy if you like my stuff too, but especially for smaller channels, right? And we exist in a hobby that is all smaller channels, right? The biggest channel in the tabletop wargaming space is now the Player's Aid, which is completely well-deserved. They're over 10,000 subscribers. That is still a tiny-ass YouTube channel by the standards of YouTube channels. They're a tremendous advantage because they have 2 people. That's tremendously advantageous. For me, it's just me. So, again, I would like to thank everybody for watching. I think we will finish up Napoleon against Russia tomorrow or something like that and get that done. It's pretty close. It's just not quite done, and I'm going to have to revisit the tray anyway. So we're going to... I might as well rejigger the tray now rather than getting it all done and then having to do it again. So, again, I'd like to thank everybody for stopping by. Again, we had spectacular numbers again tonight. On Thursday, we will be unsleeving the 2 new ASL scenario packs, the Land Down Under and the Winter Offensive pack. And then next week, we'll be unboxing Napoleon Highway to the Kremlin 2 from Kevin Zucker and OSG. And then the week after that, I'm not sure what the unboxing will be. I haven't actually filmed that yet. Well, it's filmed. I can tell you that. It just hasn't been edited yet. So a bunch of extra stuff in the pipeline. Also, on Wednesday night at 6:30 p.m. here on this channel, we will have Dan Pencaldi and maybe somebody else talking about introductory topics of interest to wargamers. We're going to start with NATO symbology. So we'll be talking about the historical antecedents of the NATO symbology. We're going to talk about why it's not actually NATO symbology. That's not the term that NATO uses for it, and wargames tend not to adhere strictly to NATO's conventions anyway. But we'll talk about all that on that subject, and we'll give people a quick nickel tour of those NATO symbols and how to recognize them. So thanks again for watching, and I will see everybody again soon. And we'll be back here next Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Counterclipping.